true irony is covering the blue variant McFarlane Batman Beyond before the real Batman Beyond. I'm sorry, but let's do it. Hey folks, David here with a relatively new-ish McFarlane Toys figure, and it's about time that we see a few more companies take interest in Batman Beyond. I feel like probably the industry as a whole should take interest into Batman Beyond. We really need a movie, Warner Brothers. I'm just saying, we could use a movie, and if so, I could always direct it. I kind of want to direct a Batman movie, Batman Beyond, with Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne. That would be perfect. I'm just letting you guys know. Anyways, bye. So aside from the other Batman Beyond figures that have come in the line, such as, of course, the Terry McGinnis Batman Beyond, Shriek, Batwoman even, as well as Blight, and then a couple of others, we have Inque as Batman Beyond. Now, that's Inque, I-N-Q-U-E, and she's actually a villain from the show. I'm not going to go into too much detail as far as her origins or her fate, if some of you have not seen the show, but she's basically one of the main villains of Batman Beyond. However, one of her powers is to be able to shape shift. And one of the forms is Batman himself here, only in her own personal style. Now, frankly, I feel like this was also kind of an outs for McFarlane Toys to give us what is essentially a Batman Beyond Terry McGinnis variant that comes in the form of a blue with some shades of kind of like a bluish, inkish, blackish kind of texture all around here within the original Batman Beyond mold, which is really ironic because I've yet to cover the original black and red Batman Beyond. So first on the docket is going to be Inque as Batman Beyond. And likewise, the first detail you'll kind of take away from here is the much more pronounced blue variant style coloring, especially right here on the bat symbol on the front. As you kind of get a little bit closer, you'll notice that most of the parts that are intended to just be straightforward black on the original Batman Beyond figure is now going to have like accents of blue. I get the intention, I get what they were trying to do, but if I may be somewhat transparent, it just looks like a kid took my original Batman Beyond figure and just kind of dipped it in like pen ink. That's kind of what it looks like, and essentially that's also kind of the purpose, but aesthetically, it's not the most pleasing look. I do like the blue on both the bat symbol and the utility belt. I do like those little fine touches, but as far as the black, like I said, you'll see those little streaks of blue kind of hidden within there, and the purpose is to make it clear that this is meant to be Inque in disguise as Batman Beyond, but it's just in figure form, it just doesn't look all that great. Maybe if it's meant to be much more animated like it is in the cartoon or even some of the adaptive comics, it will come across a little easier. What does kind of feel a little better to look at from a visual standpoint would be the wings. As you can see right there, the wings have a much more pronounced kind of pattern going along right there in black and blue, or black and indigo-ish kind of color. And it doesn't look like somebody just took the wings and dipped it in pen ink, like the rest of the figure. Here it actually looks like a straightforward pattern that's part of the plastic, part of the whole molding and illustration of the wings, and therefore it comes across a little better for my own personal taste. Aside from that though, it's essentially the same Batman Beyond figure that you have seen before as part of the McFarlane Toys Batman line. And as such, the molding of the sculpt and the detail and pretty much how the rest of the figure looks is pretty much going to be identical. It really doesn't boil to any more than that. Like I said, in the future, I will be covering the original Batman Beyond as soon as it comes into my possession, but in the meantime, I'll settle for the variant here, which overall is still a pleasant figure since it is kind of replicating that original molding of the Terry McGinnis Batman, because as you see right here, he's got the much more slender physique. He's meant to be a much more agile Batman. He's not meant to be the big, bulky Bruce Wayne type, but he still comes across fairly well in McFarlane form. I do like the details around the head and the face, as well as the cowl. And then we get to the lankier parts of the body, such as the arms and legs. And design-wise, I dig the different kind of look they went for Batman Beyond. In figure format, he does make him a little tough to kind of pose. As you can see right there, I'm struggling a little bit to kind of make sure that he's flat on the surface because of the way that he's kind of built as far as posability and sculpting. But overall, not a bad look or effort made into the figure. It's just a matter of whether or not this is the type of Batman that speaks to you. Though I will admit that the plastic could have used an extra extra couple minutes in the oven or in the kiln or 3D printer, if you will, because it does feel, I don't want to say flimsy, but a little bit on the lighter side when kind of handling him, or most especially when posing him. As far as articulation, the head does rotate 360 degrees, and it does a doable job of feeling very flexible and movable, especially when you pivot up and down. You can see right there that it does move very freely. Once we get to the rest of the bodies, where things get just a little bit on the tougher side, the arms do move 360 degrees vertically, as well as, of course, inch out that far out horizontally. I kind of want to say he's got the shrug in motion, but it's not really fully realized as I would like it to be, especially when you take into consideration, yes, he does have that extra piece in there that's supposed to allow flexibility, but ironically, the more slender Batman here doesn't move as much as the bigger, bulkier Batman McFarlane toys that I've covered in the past, so that's some irony there for you. You do have a bicep swivel that does allow the arm to rotate 360 degrees, but it feels a little too rigid. And then we get the 2 joints in the elbow that do fully bend, so I was pleased to at least see that kind of come in very fortuitously. And then we get to the wrist that does allow full 360 degree rotation, as well as being fully articulated vertically inwards and outwards, as you see right there, especially since there's quite an awful lot of real estate, if you will, for that movement to happen amongst his wrists, since he's meant to be a much leaner, lankier Batman. Then we get to the torso, which does have a cut right across the obliques right there that does allow pretty much, I'm almost willing to expect, oh my god, it's risky, but it's happening, 360 degree movement right there, as well as slight inching to the left and to the right there, again, because of how much more flexible he is, that does allow it. And then I can kind of feel it. There is a waist joint. It's very, very tight, but you can't see a little bit of movement happening there along the waist, right above the utility belt. So it doesn't flex as much as I would hope it for it to, but it is present and it is there. It's actually one of the first figures that in quite some time from McFarlane that does have both the upper oblique cut right there for rotation, as well as slight movement amongst the waist. I'm actually genuinely surprised by that. Then we get to the top of the legs, which have that patent McFarlane joint that allows mobility of the legs forwards about that far before we start to get some hesitance. Then about that far back, which is a little bit more flexible than your typical McFarlane, because this piece right here that makes up the crotch and butt area is not as pronounced or individually sculpted as some of the other Batman figures that I've covered. Then it does allow horizontal extension about that far outwards on both legs. And the knees do have the 2 joints that allow full bendability about that far back. But of course, as if you couldn't already tell, he's got wings that kind of get in the way, as opposed to the usual cape that is much more flexible than the wings that you have right here to allow that to happen. So do be careful with that when interfering. Then over on the ankles, you do have the ball joint that allows movement 360 degrees at the top of the ball joint. I never personally seen that before, unless I've been mistaken. And of course, you can bend the ankles almost all the way up. That's actually physically impossible for a human being to be able to do, but in McFarlane toys, anything is possible, at least within reason. And of course, full flexibility that much down. So because of course his physique and overall design and positioning, he allows for that to happen. So they were a little more generous on the articulated side. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised by that, as well as a slight pivot to the left and right, kind of sort of, only kind of at an angle like so. But you can rotate the ankles like I mentioned before, and you do have the pointed toes to be able to flex all the way up, as you see like right there. So even though the feeling of the figure comes across a little off to me, I'm still very appreciative that because of his physicality and the design of this version of the Terry McGinnis Batman Beyond, despite being the ink variant, they were actually much more generous than I was expecting for the articulation, specifically around the wrists and ankles, and even some of the middle joints for both sets of limbs. I would say this is one of the more posable and flexible McFarlanes that I've covered in quite some time. So that was a huge plus for a character like the Batman Beyond version of the character. Then we get to the wings. Of course, there is possibility and movability within the wings. It's a little tough on the top joint here that holds both of them together, but there is a bit of a gimmick with the wings. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of having my two favorite heroes, Spider-Man and Batman, have wings, whether it be the Batman Beyond version here or the Spider-Man version of the character where he's got the wings in between his legs and arms that make him look like a flying squirrel. I personally never liked that design choice. But in figure form here, I would say between the two, I would definitely throw it over to Batman to have the if I had to pick one to carry the evil of the wing design choice, it would be Batman. It would make much more sense for him to have it as opposed to a spider. And in order to be able to sport the wings here, he does have these little gaps right here in between each wing that clip into these pegs on the side of his gauntlets. And in doing so, you can actually have him sporting the wings and have him be able to be moved along with the arms and be connected as far as posability and overall look. So as you can see right there, as he moves the arms, he's also connected to the wings and he's ready to take flight. And in order for him to look like he's taking flight, he does come with an additional translucent base. The base is serviceable. I mean, it's meant to replace the black solid one that you traditionally get from McFarlane figures, only this one comes with a stand to be able to hold ink as Batman Beyond in midair. It, again, does the job. It's a little too rigid. It's not as posable as you would like it to be. It feels kind of flimsy and cheaply made, so it is what it is. And with that base, you can make him look like he's taking flight. But as I just mentioned, not a huge fan of the wings. I understand that they're part of the character, and I do appreciate the hinge clipping into the peg kind of mentality there to make sure that nothing feels too loose and everything feels conjoined, but I am not going to pose them like that. Instead, I'm going to utilize the other accessories that McFarlane decided to throw in with Ink Batman that are actually not too far off from the original red and black variant of Batman Beyond here. As you can see, he's got very clawed out hands here that are part of the character, part of the design, except they could come off as a little antagonistic. So if you wish, you can actually remove the hands via a peg there at the ball joint and instead swap them out for much more neutral looking glove hands inside of the peg right there, which can be either just for show or they can also be used to hold on to the custom made ink Batman Beyond Batarang, as you see right there. So it's sporting the insignia of the Batman Beyond version of the character, but of course it's also carrying over that same kind of color palette as his wings do, along with the little pattern there, the little graded kind of black and blue or black and indigo pattern. And you can fit the Batarang in either one of those neutral hands. Doesn't really work with the clawed hands because they're much more open and therefore they're not going to hold the Batarang too well in place. But with some fidgeting, you can have him hold, or I'm sorry, her. You can have her holding the Batarang in one hand, which is the neutral hand swapped out, and then on the other hand, she's got the clawed one, and there you have a much more sinister looking Batman Beyond. And overall, like, yes, I do appreciate the much better articulation that I would come to expect from a Batman McFarlane figure, especially because it's kind of favoring the physique. But at the end of the day, aside from the lore of the show and the background of the character of Ink, ultimately this is just a blue variant for the original Batman Beyond McFarlane figure that came out a few months or probably earlier last year. And as such, if I had to pick between the two, I would still cater to the original Terry McGinnis Batman Beyond because that's the original character, the original representation, and also because black on red or red on black is my favorite clash, and not necessarily blue. And in turn, I would say that if you had to pick between the two, if you're a completist, definitely get both, but aside from that, if you had to pick one, I would much more so recommend the original version of the character because ultimately, they didn't really do much different with this version here aside from just making it a blue ink variant and nothing much more. Nevertheless, if you guys want to add your own McFarlane Toys Ink as Batman figure to your collection, be sure to use the links in the description. It helps out the channel quite a bit. In the meantime, if you guys want to check out another McFarlane toy review, check out the one showing up on screen right now, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next one.